The stars looked different from this far out. Admiral Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of the UES Liberty, watching the massive space station grow larger as they approached. Nexus 7 was bigger than anything humans had ever built, a sprawling complex of metal and lights that housed representatives from 17 different alien species. After 40 years of long-distance radio conversations, humanity was finally going to meet their galactic neighbors face to face. Impressive sight, isn't it, sir? Captain Roy Blake said as he joined Morrison at the window. Blake was a solid man with gray hair and steady eyes, the kind of officer you wanted watching your back in unknown territory. He carried himself like a soldier, but today he wore the simple blue uniform of a diplomatic escort. Morrison nodded slowly. The station was beautiful in an alien way, all curves and flowing lines that human architects would never think to design. But his trained eye picked out the weapon emplacements hidden in those graceful curves, the shield generators disguised as decorative elements. Whoever built this place knew how to make war look like art. "Any word from our advance team?" Morrison asked. "Dr. Lisa Chen finished her preliminary scans an hour ago," Blake replied. "She's cataloged 12 distinct atmospheric mixes on the station. The aliens have been thoughtful enough to provide human-compatible air in our assigned sections. Ambassador Price is reviewing the cultural briefings one more time." Morrison smiled slightly. Dr. Chen was officially their xenobiologist, but she had other skills that weren't listed in her public file. Same with most of the crew, actually. The Liberty carried 47 people, and every single one of them had been chosen for reasons that went far beyond their official duties. The ship's communication system crackled to life with an alien voice. The universal translator made it sound almost human, but there was an odd rhythm to the words that reminded Morrison this was not a human speaking. "Human vessel Liberty, you are cleared for docking at Bay 7. Welcome to Nexus 7. Thank you for your hospitality," Morrison replied into the comm. "We look forward to productive discussions." The docking process took 20 minutes. Morrison watched alien ships moving around the station with casual ease, their designs as varied as the species that built them. Some looked like living creatures with organic curves and flowing surfaces. Others were purely geometric, all angles and straight lines. A few seemed to shift and change as he watched, as if they were made of liquid metal. Ambassador Helen Price met Morrison at the airlock. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. She had spent 30 years in Earth's diplomatic corps, but Morrison knew her real training went much deeper than negotiation and protocol. "The welcoming committee is waiting," she said quietly. 3 species representatives, all very eager to meet us. They've prepared quite a show." "Any concerns?" Morrison asked. Price's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "They're treating us like children who need to be impressed. Very elaborate displays, lots of talk about the wonders of galactic civilization. It feels rehearsed." Morrison nodded. Earth's intelligence services had been analyzing 40 years of alien communications, looking for patterns and hidden meanings. The picture that emerged was not entirely comforting. The galaxy seemed to have very clear rules about who belonged where, and newer species like humanity were expected to know their place. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, and Morrison got his first look at actual aliens. The 3 beings waiting for them were definitely not human, but they weren't as strange as he had expected. The first looked almost like a tall, thin person covered in silver scales. The second was broader and more muscular, with blue skin and 4 arms. The third was harder to describe, something that shifted and flowed like it was made of living shadow. "Welcome, humans," the scaled one said with what might have been a smile. "I am Diplomatic Coordinator Zaris of the Zelani Consortium. These are my colleagues, Military Advisor Corvin Thex and Cultural Observer Vorthak Kess. We are honored to host your species' first formal contact with galactic civilization." Ambassador Price stepped forward with a warm smile. "The honor is ours. I am Ambassador Helen Price, representing the United Earth government. This is Admiral Jake Morrison, commander of our delegation, and Captain Roy Blake, our security liaison." The introductions continued as they moved through the station's corridors. Morrison found himself studying everything: the layout, the technology, the way the aliens moved and interacted. Dr. Steve Carter walked beside him, officially listed as a cultural specialist but actually one of Earth's best military analysts. Carter's eyes were doing the same cataloging that Morrison was, noting exit routes and defensive positions with professional interest. The station was crowded with beings from dozens of different species. Most ignored the human delegation, but Morrison caught several groups stopping to stare. Some looked curious, others seemed amused. A few watched with what looked like calculation in their alien eyes. They passed through several different sections, each adapted for different atmospheric and gravitational requirements. The technology was impressive but not incomprehensible. Earth scientists would be fascinated by some of the solutions the aliens had developed, but nothing Morrison saw was completely beyond human understanding. "Your ship is quite small for an interstellar vessel," Advisor Thex commented as they walked. His voice had a rumbling quality that the translator couldn't quite smooth out. "Most species bring much larger delegations for first contact. We believe in quality over quantity," Admiral Morrison replied smoothly. "Our team is small but highly skilled." Observer Kess made a sound that might have been laughter. "How refreshingly humble. Most young species arrive with grand fleets and dramatic speeches about their destiny among the stars. Your approach is much more practical." Morrison exchanged a quick glance with Price. There was something in the alien's tone that didn't quite match the friendly words, something that suggested they were being underestimated, and that this was exactly what their hosts wanted. The tour ended at a large chamber with a curved ceiling that showed a real-time view of the space around the station. Dozens of alien ships moved in complex patterns, their various designs creating an impressive display of galactic diversity. At the center of the room was a conference table that could accommodate beings of many different sizes and shapes. "Tomorrow we will begin formal discussions," Coordinator Zaris said. "Tonight please accept our hospitality. We have prepared quarters for your delegation and arranged for you to sample foods from across the galaxy. Consider it a small taste of what membership in our community can offer." As the aliens departed, leaving the humans alone in their assigned quarters, Morrison gathered his senior staff for a private meeting. The rooms were comfortable but clearly monitored. Everything they said would be recorded and analyzed. "First impressions?" Morrison asked quietly. "They're confident," Price said. "Very confident. This feels like a routine they've performed many times before." Dr. Chen nodded agreement. "The biological scans confirm what we suspected. These species have been spacefaring for thousands of years. They've had time to work out their systems and hierarchies." Captain Blake was studying a data pad with apparent casualness. "Security is tight but not excessive. They're not worried about us causing trouble." Morrison smiled slightly. The aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. Earth had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, running every possible scenario and planning for every contingent outcome. Tomorrow's negotiations would determine whether humanity joined galactic civilization as equals or as something else entirely. Either way, they were ready. The morning brought a different atmosphere to the space station. Ambassador Price noticed it immediately as she walked to the conference room. The alien crew members who had been polite yesterday now barely acknowledged the human delegation. Security guards stood at intersections that had been empty before. The friendly tour guides were nowhere to be seen. Admiral Morrison sat at the conference table studying the formal documents that had been delivered to their quarters overnight. The papers were printed on some kind of synthetic material that felt almost alive under his fingers. The text was clear enough, but the meaning behind the words made his jaw tighten. "Protectorate status," he said quietly, as Captain Blake took the seat beside him. "That's what they're offering. Earth becomes a protected world under galactic supervision. We get limited trading rights and defensive guarantees in exchange for complete military oversight." Blake nodded grimly. Dr. Carter finished his analysis an hour ago. "The terms are essentially a surrender document dressed up in diplomatic language. They want control of our space forces, our industrial output, and our population movements." The conference room door opened with a soft whisper, and the 3 alien representatives entered. But today they brought friends. Military Advisor Thex was accompanied by 2 other Corvin officers whose uniforms carried more decorations and whose bearings suggested much higher rank. Coordinator Zaris had 3 additional Zalani with her, all wearing the flowing robes that indicated commercial authority. Observer Kess was flanked by 2 other Vorthok, whose shadowy forms seemed to absorb light from the room. "Good morning, humans," Coordinator Zaris said as she settled into her chair. Her tone was still polite, but the warmth from yesterday was completely gone. I trust you have reviewed our proposal for your species integration into galactic society. Ambassador Price smiled pleasantly. We have indeed studied your documents with great interest. Before we respond, we would like to clarify a few points about the terms you've outlined. Of course, Military Advisor Thex rumbled, though I should mention that these terms are quite standard. Every species that joins our community accepts similar arrangements. It's simply how civilized space operates. Dr. Lisa Chen shifted slightly in her chair. She had spent the night running detailed scans of the station and its inhabitants using equipment hidden in her medical kit. The results were disturbing. Energy readings suggested weapon systems far more powerful than anything Earth possessed. Biological analysis indicated that several of the alien species were physically capable of tearing humans apart with their bare hands. Most concerning of all, her sensors had detected traces of elements that shouldn't exist naturally, suggesting weapons technology based on exotic matter. We're curious about the enforcement mechanisms, Price said carefully. How exactly would these protective arrangements be implemented? One of the senior Corvin officers leaned forward. His uniform bore insignia that Dr. Carter recognized as Fleet Command rank. I am Admiral Corvin Vex, he said in a voice like grinding stone. Perhaps I can clarify the military aspects of your integration. Your home system would be assigned a supervision fleet to ensure compliance with galactic law. Your existing military assets would be decommissioned or transferred to coalition control. Your industrial capacity would be redirected toward peaceful purposes under our guidance. And what constitutes galactic law? Morrison asked. Observer Kess's shadowy form rippled with what might have been amusement. Whatever the coalition determines serves the greater good. We have maintained peace in this galaxy for over 2,000 years through firm but fair leadership. Newer species sometimes struggle to understand the complexity of interstellar governance. Dr. Steve Carter had been listening carefully to the conversation while running threat assessments in his head. The aliens were being very specific about their capabilities and very vague about human rights under their proposed system. Everything about their body language and word choice suggested they viewed humans as a problem, to be managed rather than equals to be welcomed. Lieutenant Commander Amy Wells sat quietly at the end of the table, her official role limited to communication support, but her real job was far more complex. Hidden in her equipment was a quantum communication array that could reach Earth instantly through entangled particle pairs. She had been sending coded updates to Strategic Command every few hours since their arrival. We notice that your proposal doesn't include representation in coalition leadership, Price observed. How would human interests be protected in this arrangement? Coordinator Zaris made a gesture that her species probably considered reassuring. Young species are rarely ready for the responsibilities of galactic governance. You would be assigned advocates who understand your needs and can speak for you in coalition councils. It's a much more efficient system than trying to include every species in every decision. Advocates, Morrison repeated slowly. Chosen by whom? By us naturally, Admiral Vex said. We have extensive experience in managing developing civilizations. Your advocates would be selected based on their understanding of both human nature and galactic requirements. The room fell quiet for a moment. Morrison could feel the weight of alien attention focused on the human delegation. This was clearly the moment when species either accepted their assigned role in galactic hierarchy or chose a much more difficult path. We appreciate the thoroughness of your proposal, Ambassador Price said finally. However, such significant decisions require consultation with our government. We request permission to contact Earth for instructions. The aliens exchanged glances that didn't require translation. Observer Kess spoke first, his voice carrying new authority. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Communication with unintegrated systems during negotiations is strictly prohibited under coalition security protocols. Security protocols, Price repeated. Recent events have made us more cautious about unsupervised contact, Admiral Vex explained. The Nexari species attempted to coordinate resistance during their integration proceedings last year. The situation became quite unfortunate for everyone involved. Dr. Carter kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. The mention of the Nexari was the first concrete reference to how the coalition dealt with uncooperative species. His briefing materials included fragmentary intelligence about the Nexari system, but the details were classified at levels above his clearance. What happened to the Nexari? Morrison asked quietly. Coordinator Zaris waved one scaled hand dismissively. They chose to resist integration despite clear evidence that cooperation was in their best interests. The coalition was forced to implement more direct governance measures. Their home system is now much more peaceful and productive under proper management. The casual way she described what sounded like conquest made Morrison's blood run cold, but he kept his voice steady. And if a species simply needs more time to consider such important decisions, time is a luxury that can become quite expensive, Admiral Vex said. The coalition maintains significant resources to ensure the safety and stability of this region. Species that remain outside our protective framework represent potential security risks that must be addressed. Lieutenant, Commander Wells felt her hidden communication device vibrate with an incoming message from Earth. The response to her latest update was brief but clear. Initiate Phase 2 protocols immediately. Morrison noticed Wells's almost imperceptible nod and felt his own tension shift into focused calm. Earth's Strategic Command had been hoping for peaceful integration, but they had planned for exactly this scenario. The aliens had just made their true position clear. Humanity was being given a choice between surrender and destruction. The problem was that the aliens had no idea what humanity's real capabilities were. They saw a single small ship with a tiny delegation from a species that had barely reached the nearest star. They expected either immediate compliance or futile resistance followed by quick defeat. They were about to learn that humans had been preparing for this conversation for decades, and they had not come to these talks planning to surrender. Ambassador Price returned to the conference room after the lunch break with a completely different presence. Gone was the polite diplomat seeking common ground. The woman who sat down at the negotiating table moved with the precise confidence of someone who had stopped pretending to be something she was not. Admiral Morrison noticed the change immediately and felt his own mask beginning to slip. Around the table, his officers were making similar transitions. Dr. Lisa Chen no longer looked like a curious scientist. Captain Blake had dropped his casual security escort manner. Dr. Steve Carter sat like the military strategist he actually was. Lieutenant Commander Wells worked openly on her communication equipment instead of hiding it. "We have finished our consultations," Price announced to the assembled alien representatives. "Earth's government has reached a decision regarding your integration proposal." Coordinator Zaris leaned forward with obvious satisfaction. "Excellent. I'm sure your leadership recognizes the benefits of joining galactic civilization under proper guidance." "Actually," Price said calmly, "we decline your offer." The silence that followed stretched for several seconds. Military Advisor Thex was the first to speak, his voice carrying a rumble of disbelief. "You decline? Perhaps you misunderstand the nature of our discussion. This is not a negotiation between equals. You are being offered a choice between cooperation and conquest." Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the station. It was not a pleasant expression. "We understand perfectly. The question is whether you understand who you're talking to." Observer Kess's shadowy form rippled with what looked like amusement. "Enlighten us, human. What could a species that has barely reached its nearest star possibly threaten us with?" Dr. Chen activated a small device that projected a three-dimensional hologram above the conference table. The image showed detailed technical specifications for Admiral Vex's flagship, including internal layout, weapon systems, shield frequencies, and structural weak points. The level of detail was impossible to explain away as lucky guessing. "We've been studying you," Chen said matter-of-factly. "Every ship in your fleet, every weapon system, every defensive measure. We know exactly how your technology works and precisely how to defeat it." Admiral Vex stared at the hologram with growing alarm. The specifications were classified at the highest levels of Corvan military security. No outside species should have access to such information. "How did you obtain this data?" Captain Blake activated his own projection device. This hologram showed the internal structure of Nexus 7 itself, complete with security protocols, weapon emplacements, and the location of every critical system. "We've been inside your networks for years. Every communication, every schematic, every tactical discussion. We've been watching and learning while you thought we were primitive children playing with chemical rockets." Coordinator Zaris struggled to maintain her composure. "Even if you have somehow stolen our technical data, what do you imagine you can do with it? You have one small ship against the entire coalition fleet." Dr. Carter spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had spent decades planning for exactly this moment. "Tell me, Coordinator, what do you know about the gifts we brought to your various species over the past year?" "The art exhibitions, the musical performances, the scientific exchanges, cultural offerings," she replied cautiously. "Standard diplomatic gestures." Each piece of art contained nanoscale monitoring devices, Carter continued conversationally. The musical performances included subsonic mapping frequencies that revealed the internal structure of every building they were performed in. The scientific data was carefully designed to lead your research programs down dead ends, while we learned everything about your actual capabilities. Morrison stood up and walked to the large window, showing the space around the station. Dozens of alien warships maintained patrol patterns in complex formations that demonstrated the Coalition's overwhelming military superiority. At least that was what it was supposed to demonstrate. "You want to know what we can threaten you with," Morrison said without turning around. "We can threaten you with the truth about what humans actually are." Lieutenant Commander Wells finished her work on the communication array and looked up with a slight smile. "Earth Command, this is Wells. Authorization confirmed. Begin Phase 3 deployment." The change was subtle at first. A few of the alien ships in the display began altering their course patterns. Their movements looked random, but Morrison could see the underlying coordination. Then more ships began changing direction, and the pattern became clear. The Coalition fleet was being herded into specific positions by forces they couldn't detect. Observer Kess's form darkened with obvious agitation. "What are you doing?" "We're revealing the reality of your situation," Morrison replied. "For the past 5 years, every major Corvan shipyard has employed human engineers. Every Zalani research facility has worked with human scientists. Every Vorthak command center has received human advisors. You thought you were studying us. Actually, we were infiltrating you." The holographic display above the table shifted to show real-time tactical information about the Coalition fleet. Ship after ship showed critical system failures as human saboteurs activated programs that had been hidden in their computers for years. Weapon systems went offline. Shield generators overloaded. Communication arrays began transmitting false orders. Admiral Vex stood with sudden alarm. "All ships, this is Fleet Command. Implement emergency security protocols immediately." "I'm afraid your communication system is no longer under your control," Wells said pleasantly. "We've been inside your networks for so long that we basically are your networks now." Dr. Chen activated another projection that showed biological and psychological profiles for every species represented in the room. The data included detailed analysis of their physical capabilities, environmental requirements, social structures, and individual psychological weaknesses. "Did you really think we would enter into negotiations without understanding exactly who we were dealing with?" The aliens were beginning to show signs of genuine fear. Their technological superiority was evaporating before their eyes as humans demonstrated capabilities that should have been impossible for such a young species. "The truth is very simple," Ambassador Price said in the tone of someone delivering a prepared statement. "Earth learned about your true nature early in our contact process. We discovered that the galaxy operates on predator-prey relationships disguised as civilization. Our response was not to build bigger weapons, but to build smarter ones." Morrison turned back to face the aliens. "We spent 40 years preparing for this conversation. We hoped for friends but planned for enemies. Every scenario was considered, every contingency prepared for, every possible response calculated and countered." Captain Blake activated a final holographic display that showed the current tactical situation in stark detail. The Coalition fleet was completely surrounded by forces that hadn't been there minutes before. Ships that looked like asteroids were revealing themselves as human vessels. Weapon platforms disguised as space debris were coming online. Communication relays hidden throughout the system were coordinating an impossible display of strategic planning. "One ship," Morrison said quietly. "You thought we brought one ship to negotiate the surrender of our species. What we actually brought was an invasion fleet disguised as a diplomatic mission." The message was clear and undeniable. Humanity had not come to these talks as supplicants seeking admission to galactic society. They had come as conquerors who preferred to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, but were fully prepared for war if diplomacy failed. The Coalition had made the mistake of threatening a species that had been planning for this exact scenario since the day they first looked at the stars and wondered who else might be out there. Admiral Vex made the decision that sealed his fleet's fate. Rather than attempt further negotiation with beings who had clearly outmaneuvered the coalition at every turn, he chose to rely on the one advantage he thought the aliens still possessed. Raw firepower and numerical superiority would crush these upstart humans regardless of their clever tricks. All ships engage the human vessel immediately, he commanded into his communicator. Target their ship and destroy it before they can implement whatever plan they're attempting. The response was swift and devastating, but not in the way he expected. The first volley of energy weapons from the Coalition fleet struck the UES Liberty with enough concentrated firepower to vaporize a small moon. The beams should have reduced the human ship to glowing plasma in seconds. Instead, something impossible happened. The energy weapons bent around the Liberty like water flowing around a stone. The ship's hull remained completely undamaged as exotic physics redirected enough destructive force to level a city. Captain Blake watched the tactical display with professional satisfaction. Gravitational deflection fields are holding steady. Their weapons can't achieve target lock through the space-time distortion we're generating. The Liberty's response came immediately. Blue-white beams lanced out from weapon ports that hadn't been visible moments before. The return fire punched through the lead Corvin battleship's shields like they were made of paper. Secondary explosions rippled along the alien vessel's hull as human. Quantum disruptors tore apart the molecular bonds holding the ship together. Morrison activated the general communication channel that now reached every ship in the Coalition fleet. "This is Admiral Morrison of the human fleet. Your weapons are ineffective against our defensive systems. Surrender immediately and you will be treated according to the laws of war." Admiral Vex stared at his tactical display in disbelief. His most powerful battleship was drifting dead in space, its hull split open like a cracked egg. The human vessel showed no damage whatsoever, despite absorbing enough firepower to destroy anything the Coalition had ever built. All ships concentrate fire on the human ship. Maximum power to all weapon systems. What happened next broke every rule of space combat that the Coalition understood. The UES Liberty began to change. The ship's hull seemed to flow and reshape itself, growing larger and more complex. Then it divided, one ship becoming two identical vessels. The process repeated as each new ship split again, creating 4 human warships where moments before there had been only one. Dr. Chen had moved to the station's command center during the opening moments of the battle. Her official role as xenobiologist had been abandoned in favor of her real specialty, which was electronic warfare and tactical systems analysis. "The replication process is working perfectly," she reported to Morrison. "Each new vessel is fully functional and crewed. The Coalition sensors can't understand what they're seeing." The truth was both simpler and more complex than the aliens could comprehend. Humanity had not sent a single ship to the peace talks. They had sent one ship carrying enough compressed matter and energy to construct an entire battle fleet using human assembler technology. The Liberty was essentially a mobile shipyard that could create new vessels from stored materials using principles that the Coalition's scientists had never discovered, Captain. Blake coordinated the expanding human fleet with calm efficiency. Each new ship shared data through quantum-entangled communication systems that operated faster than light. The vessels moved with perfect coordination, their actions guided by tactical computers that had been analyzing Coalition fleet movements for years. The space battle became a demonstration of technological superiority that was both brief and decisive. Human ships appeared and disappeared using stealth systems that made them invisible to Coalition sensors. Their weapons struck with impossible accuracy, while alien return fire passed harmlessly through empty space where the human vessels had been microseconds before. On Nexus 7, the battle for control of the station was equally one-sided. Ambassador Price had shed any pretense of being a mere diplomat. She moved through the station's corridors with the fluid grace of someone trained in combat techniques that most species had never encountered. When 3 Corvin guards attempted to restrain her, she disabled all of them in seconds using pressure point strikes that their alien physiology made especially vulnerable to. Dr. Steve Carter revealed his true role as a special forces operative by producing weapons that had been hidden in what appeared to be harmless diplomatic equipment. The energy rifle he assembled from components disguised as cultural gifts could punch through the heaviest armor the Coalition had developed. His tactical knowledge of the station's layout, gained through months of careful study, let him move through the complex like he had built it himself. Lieutenant Commander Wells had taken control of the station's communication array within minutes of the fighting starting. Every message between coalition ships was now being intercepted, analyzed, and sometimes replaced with false information that sowed confusion among the alien forces. Her electronic warfare capabilities turned the coalition's own communication network into a weapon against them. The turning point came when coalition forces realized they were fighting an enemy that had been preparing for this exact battle for decades. Every human on the station demonstrated training and equipment that far exceeded what any diplomatic mission should possess. They moved with coordination that suggested they had rehearsed these exact scenarios countless times. Observer Kess made a desperate attempt to rally the station's defenses by activating weapons systems that had been hidden in the structure's decorative elements. The massive energy cannons emerged from concealed ports and turned toward the expanding human fleet with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The weapons never fired. Dr. Chen's infiltration of the station's computer systems had been so complete that she controlled every critical function. "Station weapons are offline," she reported calmly. "I've also disabled their self-destruct systems in case they decide to take us with them." Morrison watched the tactical display as the last coalition vessels either surrendered or fled toward the edge of the system. The battle had lasted less than 30 minutes. A fleet that had been assembled to intimidate humanity into submission was scattered, destroyed, or captured. The mighty coalition that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years had been defeated by a species they thought was primitive. "Sir, we're receiving surrender signals from 17 coalition vessels," Captain Blake reported. "The remaining ships are attempting to retreat, but our pursuit vessels are faster." Morrison nodded with satisfaction. Earth's Strategic Command had planned for this outcome but hoped it wouldn't be necessary. Humanity preferred peaceful coexistence, but they had learned from history that predators only understood strength. The galaxy's power structure was about to change in ways that the Coalition never imagined possible. "Open a channel to all Coalition forces," Morrison ordered. "It's time to discuss new terms for galactic civilization." 3 weeks after the battle at Nexus 7, Admiral Morrison stood in what had once been the Coalition's primary command center on the planet Corvin, Prime. The transition of power had been swift and surprisingly peaceful once the galaxy's various species realized that resistance was futile. Human fleets had appeared in dozens of star systems simultaneously, revealing that Earth's infiltration had been far more extensive than anyone imagined. The command center's walls displayed real-time information from across the galaxy. Species after species was surrendering as they discovered that human agents had been embedded in their governments and militaries for years. The Zalani Consortium's trade networks were under human control. The Vorthak hierarchy's communication systems answered to Earth Command. Even the proud Corvin Empire's military academies had been teaching tactics developed by human strategic planners. Ambassador Price, now serving as humanity's Director of Galactic Affairs, reviewed reports from newly liberated worlds with quiet satisfaction. The Nexari home system, which had been under Coalition occupation for over a year, was celebrating its freedom as human peacekeeping forces helped them rebuild their government. Dozens of smaller species that had been enslaved or exploited by the Coalition were experiencing independence for the first time in centuries. "The transition is proceeding faster than our most optimistic projections," Price reported to Morrison. "Most species are actually welcoming human administration. They're discovering that we meant what we said about equality and representative government." Morrison nodded as he studied reports from Captain Blake, who was now coordinating security across 17 star systems. The former Coalition leadership had expected the humans to implement the same iron-fisted rule they had used for millennia. Instead, they found themselves dealing with conquerors who seemed genuinely interested in making life better for everyone. Dr. Lisa Chen had established her headquarters in the former Coalition Scientific Research Facility. Her work now focused on sharing human medical technology with alien species that had been denied access to advanced treatments under the old system. The breakthroughs were remarkable. Human genetic therapy was proving effective across multiple alien biologies, and human artificial intelligence was helping solve scientific problems that had puzzled Coalition researchers for generations. "The real surprise is how grateful they are," Chen reported during the daily briefing. "The Coalition kept most species at subsistence levels while claiming it was for their own protection. When we started sharing our technology freely, the response was overwhelming. Dr. Steve Carter had taken over coordination of the new Galactic Defense Network. His analysis of coalition military records revealed the true scope of their oppression. Over the past 1,000 years, the coalition had destroyed or enslaved hundreds of species that refused to accept protectorate status. Entire civilizations had been wiped out for the crime of wanting to govern themselves. "We're finding mass graves on every world we liberate," Carter reported grimly. The coalition wasn't just authoritarian, they were actively genocidal. Any species that showed signs of developing advanced technology independently was eliminated as a potential threat. Lieutenant Commander Wells had established the new Galactic Communication Network using human, quantum entanglement technology. For the first time in galactic history, every inhabited world could communicate instantly with every other world. The effect on trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange was revolutionary. The former coalition leadership found themselves in an unexpected position. Rather than being executed or imprisoned as they had expected, they were being offered roles in the new governmental structure. The catch was that they would be working for the benefit of all species, rather than just the powerful ones. Coordinator Zaris, former leader of the Zelani Consortium, now served as an economic advisor helping to restructure trade relationships based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Her knowledge of galactic commerce was valuable, but her decisions were now subject to oversight by representatives from species that had previously been excluded from economic power. Admiral Vex found himself working with human military planners to design a new defense doctrine based on protection rather than conquest. His expertise with coalition technology was essential for the transition, but he discovered that human strategic thinking was decades ahead of anything the coalition had developed. Observer Kess struggled more than the others with the new reality. The Vorthak had been the coalition's primary intelligence service, using their natural abilities to infiltrate and manipulate other species. Under human rule, they were being retrained to use their skills for gathering scientific data and cultural information rather than for espionage and control. Morrison called a General Assembly on the anniversary of the peace talks that had started everything. Representatives from over 300 species gathered in a vast amphitheater that human engineers had constructed specifically for democratic meetings. The design ensured that every delegate could see and hear every other delegate regardless of their species' sensory capabilities. 1 year ago, humanity was offered a choice between slavery and destruction. Morrison addressed the assembled delegates. "We chose a third option that the coalition didn't think existed. We chose to change the rules entirely." The response from the audience was overwhelming. Species that had been silent for centuries under coalition rule now had voices in galactic government. Former slave races sat as equals beside their former masters. Young civilizations that had been marked for conquest were helping to write the laws that would govern their own development. Ambassador Price outlined the new galactic charter that had been developed through months of democratic deliberation. Every species had the right to self-determination. No world could be invaded or controlled without the consent of its inhabitants. Technology would be shared freely rather than hoarded by the powerful. Trade would benefit all participants rather than enriching only the strong. The enforcement mechanism was both simple and revolutionary. Human monitoring stations existed throughout inhabited space, but they operated with complete transparency. Any species could inspect the stations and verify that they were being used only for defensive purposes. The old coalition's secret police had been replaced by an open system that answered to elected representatives from every member world. Dr. Chen presented the scientific achievements that had been accomplished in just 1 year of cooperation. Diseases that had plagued certain species for millennia were being cured using techniques developed through cross-species research. Agricultural methods developed by one civilization were helping others feed their populations more effectively. Energy technologies were being shared that would allow even the most primitive worlds to achieve post-scarcity societies within decades. The most remarkable change was in how species interacted with each other. Under coalition rule, contact between different civilizations had been strictly controlled and often hostile. The new government encouraged cultural exchange, scientific collaboration, and peaceful competition. Young members of different species were working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system. Morrison concluded the assembly with a simple statement that defined humanity's approach to galactic leadership. We didn't come to the stars to rule over others. We came to find friends and allies who would help us explore the universe together. Today, we're no longer alone. The peace talks had failed, but something far better had taken their place. The galaxy had new management, and for the first time in thousands of years, every species could look to the stars with hope, rather than fear.